My son slammed a black folder on the table and hissed, "You stole my savings, old man." Police sirens wailed outside, closing in. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder, my name scrawled across papers I had never seen before. My dignity cracked in that instant. Was I the thief, or the one being framed? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. The morning after the accusation, I tried to pretend life was still ordinary. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, and the smell of burnt toast lingered in the kitchen. For a moment, I let myself believe the storm had passed, that the sirens I'd heard last night were for someone else, that the folder wasn't still sitting on the table like an execution notice. But it was. Its black cover caught the morning light, and the silence around it felt heavier than the steam curling from my coffee mug. I sat down with my cup, the wood of the chair creaking under me, and waited for the familiar sound of my son's footsteps. Years ago, mornings meant shared breakfasts, casual talk about weather or bills. Now, it felt like waiting for a guard to patrol the prison corridor. He came down eventually, his eyes still half shut but his mouth already sharp. "You drinking coffee again?" he muttered. "Maybe try doing something useful for once." The words landed like nails. He didn't look at me, didn't have to. His tone carried all the contempt he wanted me to hear. I kept my eyes on the folder. "Do you want breakfast?" My voice was steady, though my hand tightened around the mug. "No," he snapped. "I don't want anything from you." The clink of the spoon against porcelain sounded louder than it should have, like punctuation to his dismissal. His wife appeared a moment later, her perfume arriving before she did. She glanced at me, then at the folder. Her lips curled slightly, like she already knew its contents, like she was certain of my guilt. She didn't speak, but the silence between us was worse than her words. Silence can accuse louder than shouting. I tried to shift the conversation, desperate to hold on to a shred of normalcy. "The grass needs cutting today. I'll take care of it after breakfast." My son scoffed, loud enough to fill the kitchen. "You think cutting grass pays the bills? You think that folder lies?" He tapped it once with his finger, a gesture casual but cruel. Something inside me twisted. That folder was no longer just paper. It had become a blade, pressed against my throat in my own home. I stood slowly, forcing myself not to shake. "I've given my life to this house, to you. Don't mistake my silence for weakness." He finally met my eyes, and I saw no trace of the boy I'd raised. Only calculation. Only contempt. The coffee had gone cold in my hand, but I sipped it anyway, needing something bitter to anchor me. My wife used to say coffee kept her grounded when life spun too fast. Today, it tasted like ashes. I set the cup down and brushed my fingers over the folder's rough surface. It was warmer than it should have been, almost as if it had been touched recently. My stomach tightened. Had someone been rifling through it while I slept? I pushed it back toward the center of the table, away from me, but my son's hand shot out. He pulled it close, his knuckles pale. "Don't even think about touching this again. You've done enough damage." The knife slid deeper with those words. My own blood treating me like a criminal in my own house. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence cuts sharper than words. The rest of the day moved in fragments. The hum of the fridge. The faint thud of my son's boots across the floor. The muted laughter from the living room where I was no longer welcome. Every sound reminded me that the house was less mine with each passing hour. At dinner, he didn't speak to me at all. His wife filled the silence with shallow remarks, always circling back to money, expenses, accounts. Each sentence a reminder that I was not a father to them anymore, I was a ledger. A liability. Later that night, I lingered in the hallway, watching shadows stretch across the floor. My son's voice drifted from behind a closed door. "If he resists, we'll push harder. He'll break. I clenched my jaw, fists trembling at my sides. Break? He thought I'd break? Sleep came in restless waves. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the folder. It was no longer where I'd left it. Instead, it sat closer to the edge of the table, its cover slightly open, a corner of forged paper jutting out like a mocking tongue. Someone had moved it. Someone had been inside my life without permission. They thought the folder would silence me. Instead, it whispered the truth, that my own house no longer belonged to me. Someone had been inside my life without permission. The morning sun spilled across the porch, but it didn't bring warmth. My son stood in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. His wife lingered behind him, her eyes sharp, watching me the way one watches a stranger, not family. He didn't waste time. Either you start listening, or you start packing, he said. His voice had none of the hesitation a son should have when speaking to his father. The words clanged in my chest like iron bars closing. I looked at him, hoping for some crack of remorse, some flicker of the boy I raised. But there was nothing, only a cold, practiced contempt. Listening to what? I asked. My voice was steady, though I felt the edges of my patience fraying. To us, he snapped. To how this house should run. To who actually pays the bills now. No more freeloading. No more pretending you're in charge. His wife stepped forward, arms folded, her smirk polished and merciless. It's simple. Respect our rules, or leave. This isn't your kingdom anymore. The words cut deeper than any knife. Respect our rules. Leave. They weren't suggestions, they were orders. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I built this house. Every brick, every nail carries my sweat. You dare to tell me it's not mine? My son's lips curled. Sentiment doesn't pay the mortgage. Behind his shoulder, I caught sight of the black folder sitting on the side table, its presence looming like a silent judge. He had placed it there deliberately, like a loaded gun in plain view. You want to wave false papers at me? I asked quietly. Go ahead. But don't mistake a signature for truth. His wife leaned closer, her perfume choking the air. Truth is what people believe. And right now, they believe you're a thief. I turned away, jaw locked. Their cruelty wasn't just inside the house anymore, it was spilling outward, staining the air around us. The knock on the door startled all of us. A neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, stood on the porch, clutching a basket of rolls. Her eyes flicked between my son and me, then landed on the folder. Everything all right? She asked, voice cautious. My son forced a laugh that sounded brittle. Just a family matter. Nothing to worry about. But the damage was done. Mrs. Jensen's brows pinched. Her gaze lingered on me, then on the folder, then back again. She knew something was wrong. She'd tell others. I stepped outside, brushing past my son, needing air before the walls closed in. The morning was quiet, but quiet never lasts in small towns. By the time I reached the edge of the yard, another neighbor across the street had paused mid-step, pretending to check his mailbox while his eyes stayed fixed on us. Whispers always start this way, unspoken, unconfirmed, but loud enough to burn. Is it true? Mrs. Jensen finally asked, her voice low. They say you took something. The question sliced through me. Not an accusation yet, but worse, doubt from someone who had once trusted me. I met her eyes. I've stolen nothing. What's mine is being taken from me. She didn't reply, but the way her mouth pressed tight told me everything. Belief doesn't need evidence. It just needs whispers. Behind me, my son's voice carried across the yard. Loud. Deliberate. He doesn't want to admit it. He thinks we're blind, but we know what he's done. I spun, fury tightening my chest. Watch your tongue. He stepped forward, smiling now, as if he knew every word was fuel for the gossip already sparking. Why? Afraid the truth might slip out? His wife's laughter followed like broken glass scattering across the porch. I saw another curtain twitch across the street. More eyes. More ears. My humiliation was no longer private, it was public theater. And my son played his role with relish. The folder still sat on the table inside, visible through the doorway. Its black cover seemed to glow against the pale light, a silent exhibit for anyone watching. Proof, they'd think. Proof of the father's guilt. I forced my voice calm, though my insides shook. This house is mine. This dignity is mine. You can shout, you can lie, but you will not erase me. His smirk widened. Erase you? No. Replace you. For a moment, the world tilted. The boy I'd raised, the child who once ran to me after nightmares, now stood like a stranger, issuing ultimatums in my own yard. Mrs. Jensen shifted, uncomfortable, and finally turned away, muttering something under her breath I couldn't catch. But it didn't matter. Her silence was worse than words. Silence meant she'd repeat what she'd seen. By sundown, the whole block would know. I turned back toward the house. My son was already inside, his wife beside him, the folder between them like treasure they'd unearthed. For the first time, I understood something brutal and undeniable. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't about money. It was about power. And I had just been given my ultimatum. My son didn't want my respect, he wanted my erasure, and he wanted an audience to witness it. And for the first time, I realized my own blood wanted me gone. The next evening, the house felt colder, though the heater hummed in the corner. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the black folder lying open between us. Its papers were spread out like a battlefield, each page a bullet aimed at my chest. My son leaned forward, eyes hard. You drained my savings. I want it back. Now. I shook my head slowly. I touched nothing that belonged to you. His wife cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. Don't lie. The bank doesn't make mistakes. The statements are right there. She tapped the folder with manicured nails, the sound echoing like a gavel striking wood. I pulled one of the papers closer, holding it under the dim light. My name was scrawled across the bottom in a signature that looked almost right, but not quite. The loops were wrong. The pressure inconsistent. This isn't mine, I said. My voice was steady, but my hand trembled as I pointed to the forged lines. My son laughed, low and bitter. Convenient. The thief claims forgery. How original. Something inside me cracked. He didn't just doubt me, he wanted to believe I was guilty. I placed the page flat on the table and leaned closer. You think a pen stroke makes me a liar? You think a piece of paper erases decades of sacrifice? He slammed his hand down, rattling the coffee mug beside me. Don't turn this around. That's my money, and you stole it. His wife's eyes gleamed. You could end this right now. Admit what you did. Sign over what's left. Or, she let the silence hang, a noose tightening around my neck. Or the police handle it. My chest burned. They were cornering me with their lies, using the folder as both evidence and weapon. You'd call the police on your own father? I asked. My son didn't flinch. If that's what it takes. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. The boy I had raised now stood before me as executioner. I gathered the papers, flipping through them slowly. Each page was another accusation, withdrawals, transfers, signatures I had never written. The more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't sloppy. It was meticulous. Someone had planned this. Someone had studied my handwriting. Someone had prepared this trap long before the first accusation. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw not desperation in my son's face, but certainty. He believed these lies because they gave him power. "You forged these," I whispered. His wife smirked. "Prove it." Those two words struck harder than any blow. "Prove it." Not, "You're wrong." Not, "We can talk." Just a challenge. They knew the weight of the folder was enough to crush me in the court of public opinion. My hand shook as I reached for my coffee mug. The liquid had gone cold again, bitter and unwelcoming. I took a sip anyway, needing something to steady me. My wife used to call it my anchor. Tonight, it tasted like betrayal. I pushed the folder back toward them, refusing to hold it any longer. "If you're so sure, take it to the bank. Take it to the police. But remember this, what you hand over as evidence may come back as proof of your lies." My son's jaw clenched, a flicker of doubt flashing across his eyes. But his wife leaned in quickly, smothering it. "We'll do just that. And when they see your signature, they'll lock you away." The sound of her voice, so certain, so cruel, hollowed something inside me. I felt like a ghost in my own home, stripped of dignity by the very people who should have guarded it. I stood, pushing back my chair slowly. My knees ached, but I forced my spine straight. This house stands because of me. Every dollar you've ever touched passed through my hands first. If you think forged paper can erase that, you're mistaken. My son sneered. "You're finished, old man. This folder says so." I looked at the black cover, the way it gleamed under the kitchen light. For years, folders in my life had meant tax returns, insurance policies, tuition receipts, proof of sacrifice. Now, this one had become a coffin, and they wanted me inside it. I didn't answer him. Words would have been wasted. Later that night, as the house quieted, I walked past the table again. The folder still sat there, its edges aligned perfectly, too perfectly, as if someone wanted me to see its order, its control. I stopped, my hand hovering above it but not touching. For the first time, I realized the truth wasn't in what the folder said. It was in what it hid. I left it where it was, my heart pounding, my dignity torn but not destroyed. My hand never signed, but my name already bled. I signed nothing, yet my name was already there. If you're still here, don't forget to subscribe, and comment your thoughts. The house no longer breathed the same. Every corner felt like it belonged to someone else. My son and his wife sat at the kitchen table again that night, the black folder spread between them like scripture. Their voices were low but cutting, the kind you whisper not because you're afraid to be overheard, but because you want the target to feel excluded. When I stepped in, silence dropped like a curtain. My son looked up, his mouth tightening. "We've been clear enough. You either fall in line or you leave." I didn't move. "Fall in line with what?" His wife leaned back, crossing her arms. "With us. With the truth." Her voice dripped with sarcasm on the word truth. "Stop fighting what everyone's going to know anyway. Admit it. Sign it over. Or walk out the door and don't come back." The words struck me harder than they intended. They weren't giving me choices, they were stripping me of them. I sat across from them, pulling the folder toward me. The papers were aligned perfectly, like they'd rehearsed this presentation. The forged signatures glared at me, my name bleeding across lines I had never touched. "You're asking me," I said slowly, "to confess to something I didn't do." My son leaned forward. "We're asking you to end this quietly. Before it gets worse." I stared at him, searching for the boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who once fell asleep on my shoulder after scraped knees and tears. That boy was gone. Replaced by a man with eyes colder than the steel of the lock on that folder. "You'd rather believe a forgery than your father?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word cracked something inside me, but it also lit a fire. His wife slid a pen across the table. Sign it. Admit the money's his. Admit the theft. Or tomorrow morning, we take this folder to the bank and the police. And you'll leave in handcuffs instead of on your own 2 feet. I picked up the pen, holding it loosely between my fingers. Its weight felt heavier than it should have, like I was holding a verdict. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for surrender. The room smelled faintly of fried onions from dinner, but underneath it all was the stench of betrayal. I lowered the pen to the paper, then stopped. My son's eyes glimmered with victory. That's right. Do it. End this. But I didn't move. Instead, I pushed the pen back toward them. Slowly. Deliberately. I will never confess to a crime I didn't commit. His wife slammed her hand on the table. Then get out. The walls seemed to tremble with her fury. My son stood, pointing toward the door. This house isn't yours anymore. You stay under our rules, or you don't stay at all. For a long moment, I didn't move. My breath was heavy, my hands trembling, but not from fear. From resolve. I looked around the room. The photographs on the wall, the worn furniture, the kitchen clock ticking endlessly, all pieces of a life I had built with my bare hands. And yet here I stood, treated like an intruder. I reached for my coffee mug on the counter, the one my late wife had given me decades ago. It was chipped, stained, but still mine. I held it like an anchor, like a reminder of who I was. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought I'd beg for mercy. They thought the folder was the final word. Instead, I smiled. A small, quiet smile that unsettled them more than shouting ever could. You think you're winning, I said softly. But you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Their expressions shifted, confusion, then irritation. I stood, carrying my mug to the sink, rinsing it one last time. The sound of water hitting porcelain felt like the end of something sacred. Then I walked down the hall, opened the closet, and pulled out my old suitcase. Its zipper rasped open, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. From the corner of my eye, I saw my son's face pale. He hadn't expected this. He expected a fight, a breakdown, a plea. Not this. You can't just leave, he said, voice cracking for the first time. But I was already folding shirts, tucking away the mug wrapped in an old sweater. My wife's photograph slipped into the side pocket. With each item I packed, the air grew heavier. His wife's voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. Where do you think you'll go? You have nothing without us. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound final, like a door slamming closed. Then I turned, meeting their eyes one last time. You're wrong. I have everything you'll never have again, my dignity. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. They thought I would beg. Instead, I reached for my suitcase. They thought I would bend. Instead, I picked up my suitcase. The suitcase groaned under its zipper as I pulled it from the closet. That sound should have meant travel, new beginnings, or a long-awaited visit somewhere. But tonight, it sounded like thunder, heavy, final, a storm I could not avoid. I packed methodically. Shirts folded with steady hands. My wife's photograph slipped into the side pocket. The chipped coffee mug wrapped carefully in a sweater. Little fragments of my life, reduced to luggage. In the living room, their voices were low and tense. My son whispered, "He'll cave. He always caves." His wife's reply cut sharp, "Not this time. He's packing. If he leaves, we'll use the folder. The police will believe us before they believe him." The black folder wasn't in sight, but it lingered in my mind. I had studied it enough to know every crooked loop of that forged signature, every line of accusation. I didn't carry it in my suitcase, but its weight followed me all the same. Memory had burned it into me, page by page. I zipped the bag fully and took one last look at the house. The walls I had painted, the floor I had repaired after storms, the roof I had replaced shingle by shingle. Every corner carried my sweat. Yet it no longer carried my name. I stepped into the hallway, suitcase in hand. My son appeared, blocking the door with folded arms. "So that's it? You're running away?" "I'm not running," I said calmly. "I'm walking out of a house that no longer respects me." His wife smirked from behind him. "Good. Less mess for us to clean up when you're gone." I didn't answer. Words were wasted on those who chose lies over blood. The door creaked open, and cold night air rushed in. As I stepped onto the porch, the sound of wheels on wood seemed louder than anything. My suitcase rattled across the planks, echoing into the quiet street. But the street wasn't empty. Mrs. Jensen stood on her porch again, her arms folded across her chest. 2 houses down, Mr. Carter leaned against his truck, pretending to light a cigarette though his eyes stayed locked on me. Curtains twitched. Shadows moved behind windows. They were all watching. I tightened my grip on the handle and forced my steps steady. Each roll of the suitcase was an announcement: the father had been cast out. Behind me, my son's voice carried into the night. "Don't worry, folks. He won't be our problem much longer. We've got proof." Laughter followed, his wife's laugh, shrill and brittle. My face burned. Not from the cold, but from shame. Neighbors didn't need details, they only needed tone. Proof. Thief. Disgrace. The words would travel faster than the wind. I reached the sidewalk, lifting my head despite the weight in my chest. If they wanted me humiliated, they'd see me leave with dignity intact, shoulders straight. Mrs. Jensen muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "He's being thrown out of his own house." The word sliced through the night like a blade. Not a question, not pity, just fact. I kept walking. My suitcase bumped against the uneven pavement, a stubborn rhythm to match my heartbeat. At the corner, I paused, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to look back one last time. The house glowed in the porch light, my son's silhouette framed in the doorway. The black folder sat in his hands, raised like a trophy, proof of his so-called victory. He wanted the world to see me leaving under that shadow. I whispered under my breath, too soft for anyone but me to hear, "You don't know it yet, but you've just freed me." The walk to the small motel on the edge of town was quiet except for the scrape of my suitcase wheels. The lobby smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee, but it was mine. For the first time in years, no one judged me as I set down my bag. That night, I couldn't sleep. The neon sign outside blinked red against the curtains, casting shadows across the room. On the nightstand, I spread out the copies I had made weeks earlier, long before this confrontation. My instinct had warned me. I had scanned the folder's contents when my son wasn't home, every page saved to a USB drive tucked into my wallet. The originals may have stayed in the house, but the truth was here with me. I stared at the forged signatures, the fraudulent withdrawals, the numbers that screamed of lies. Rage flickered in my chest, but beneath it, something colder stirred. Strategy. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness. And a witness with proof can become a judge. The night air pressed heavy through the thin motel walls. Somewhere down the hall, a couple argued in muffled tones. The world kept moving, but inside my room, time froze. I placed the folder copies in a neat stack, folded my hands, and let the silence speak. For the first time since this began, silence wasn't their weapon. It was mine. They paraded my shame in front of neighbors, but I carried the memory of every page, and memory never lies. At dawn, I canceled the first payment that kept them afloat. By sunrise, the motel room was drenched in red from the neon sign outside, its glow bleeding through the curtains. I sat at the desk, coffee steaming in a styrofoam cup, my suitcase still unopened on the bed. The copies of the black folder were spread out in front of me like war maps. This wasn't just paper anymore. It was evidence. It was ammunition. I powered on the old laptop I had brought with me. The fan hummed weakly, the screen flickered, but it still worked. One by one, I laid out my accounts, passwords, statements, the tools of a lifetime of sacrifice. With each click, I felt more awake, more alive. The first target was the mortgage. My son thought it was his house now, but the bank still knew my name. I pulled up the account, the auto payment set to withdraw from my funds each month. My hand hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I clicked. The cancellation confirmation appeared on the screen, plain and cold. The sound of that keystroke was louder than thunder. I whispered to myself, one chain, broken. Next came the credit cards. I had added him years ago as an authorized user, telling myself it would help him build credit, help him start strong. Instead, he used them like weapons. I opened the online account, scrolling until his name appeared under authorized users. My finger trembled, not from doubt, but from the years of blindness that had allowed this to happen. I selected remove user and hit confirm. Another click. Another chain, gone. I leaned back in the chair, the cheap wood groaning under me, and let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, my money felt like mine again. But I wasn't finished. Insurance was next. I cancelled his car policy, one I had foolishly covered when he said he needed temporary help. The screen refreshed, leaving only my name behind. Groceries, utilities, all the little auto transfers I had set up for them, I stopped them all. Each transaction felt like pulling a nail out of my own coffin. By the time I finished, the motel room felt different. The air was lighter. My chest wasn't weighed down. The styrofoam cup was half empty now, the coffee cold. I raised it anyway, a bitter toast to freedom. For a long moment, I stared at the folder copies on the desk. Their accusations were false, but they had forced me into clarity. They had stripped me of illusion, of false loyalty. In a twisted way, I was grateful. My son thought he had cornered me with that folder. He didn't realize he had handed me the scalpel to cut myself free. The motel phone rang, sudden and sharp, cutting through the silence. I didn't answer. But I knew who it was. Instead, I closed my laptop, slid the copies of the folder into an envelope, and tucked it under the mattress. My war chest was ready. I sat back down, watching the sunrise creep higher. Somewhere across town, their morning was beginning too. My son reaching for his coffee, his wife scrolling through bills. Any minute now, the storm would break. I almost wished I could see their faces when the calls started, when the mortgage bounced, when the credit cards declined, when the insurance agent explained the policy was gone. I imagined his fist slamming against the table, her voice rising in panic. I could hear it even from here, like echoes carried through time. For once, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the hunter. I whispered into the empty room, the words tasting sharp and new, "This was never your house. It was mine. And now you'll learn what it feels like to lose." The motel walls held the silence, but it was a silence of my own making, not theirs. I looked at my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I didn't see a beaten-down old man. I saw a father who still had fight left in him. I turned back to the desk, picking up the envelope with the copies. My fingers traced its edge. The black folder had started as a weapon against me. Now, its shadow was my shield. I placed it carefully back under the mattress. Let them think I walked away empty-handed. Let them believe their lies. They would never see this coming. As the neon light flickered off, replaced by morning sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because the war was over, but because, finally, it had begun on my terms. For the first time in years, my account was mine alone. By nightfall, their phones would ring, their bills would bounce, and my silence would be deafening. Tell me, what would you do in this situation? I'd love to know. By Wednesday morning, the motel phone rattled against the nightstand. When I checked the screen, 12 missed calls blinked back at me. By Friday, that number had doubled. I didn't need to guess who it was. I brewed the weak motel coffee, its bitter smell filling the small room, and sat at the desk. The envelope of folder copies rested beneath the lamp, a silent anchor reminding me that truth was on my side. I wasn't afraid of their calls anymore. I was curious. I pressed play on the first voicemail. My son's voice cracked with fury. "Dad, the bank says the mortgage bounced." "What the hell did you do?" The second message came from his wife, shrill and cold. "You're destroying us. Put the payments back, or I swear we'll go to the police tomorrow." The third had less anger, more panic. "Insurance says our car isn't covered anymore. Do you want us on the street? Do you want your grandchildren in danger?" I deleted each message after listening, my thumb steady, my chest calm. Their chaos had no place here. By Saturday, the tone had shifted. My son's anger thinned into something else, desperation. "Dad, listen, we can talk about this. Just come home. Please. We'll figure it out." His wife left one immediately after, her words forced through gritted teeth. "You're making a fool of yourself. Everyone knows you're unstable. Just admit you messed up." I leaned back in the chair, letting their voices fade. The motel was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing outside. That silence was my ally now. Their world spun faster with every bill, every rejection. Mine stood still, balanced, free. I went for a walk down the street, the late afternoon sun warming the cracked pavement. At the diner, I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. People came and went, some glancing at me longer than usual. I could almost feel the whispers chasing behind me, rumors of eviction, rumors of theft. But for once, I didn't shrink under them. The waitress, a kind woman named Carol, poured my refill and leaned closer. "Heard your boy's been having money trouble," she said softly. "Shame how quick news travels in this town." I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded, because silence has its own power. Back at the motel, the calls kept stacking. 24. 32. By Sunday, I stopped counting. That evening, I sat in the dim glow of the motel lamp, the copies of the folder spread before me again. Each forged signature glared back like a wound. But now, instead of pain, I felt steel in my veins. They wanted to paint me as a thief. Yet every paper they used was proof of their lies. The motel phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Dad?" My son's voice trembled. Not with anger this time, but with fear. "You don't understand. They're threatening to take the house. We need you. Please." I stayed silent, letting the pause stretch. "Dad," he said again, softer. "We can fix this. Just put the payments back. Nobody has to know." Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, almost detached. "You gave me a choice, remember? Obey, or leave. I chose." He stammered. "That was different. We were angry. You don't have to do this." I hung up. Moments later, another call came, her voice this time, sharper, desperate. "You're ruining your own blood. What kind of father does this? Do you want us dead in the street?" Her rage cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I heard the fear beneath it. I deleted the message without listening further. The motel room felt heavier as night fell. Shadows stretched long across the walls. I poured myself another coffee, sipping it slowly. Each swallow tasted of bitter victory. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the motel door. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. The knocks came again, harder this time. I set the mug down, my hand trembling just slightly. Quietly, I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. 2 shadows stood in the hallway, my son and his wife. His shoulders hunched, his face pale. Her arms folded tight, jaw clenched. They had found me. The silence of the motel broke, replaced by the echo of their presence. My sanctuary was no longer untouched. For the first time, their desperation traveled farther than their lies. It followed me to my door. Through the peephole, I saw them both, looking more desperate than I'd ever seen. A sharp knock rattled my motel door. The hallway lights flickered, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale carpet. I pressed my eye to the peephole, and there they were, my son and his wife, standing shoulder to shoulder, faces drawn tight with desperation. I opened the door halfway, the chain still fastened. "You found me." My son shoved forward, but the chain held. "We need to talk. Now." "Talk," I said flatly. His wife's voice sliced through. "You've ruined us, old man. The mortgage bounced. The car insurance is gone. Credit cards cancelled. We can't even buy groceries." I leaned on the doorframe, keeping my voice steady. "You told me to leave. So I left. Everything else, that was just me listening to you." His face twisted. "Don't play games. You're destroying us out of spite." I almost laughed at that, spite. After everything they'd done. But I didn't. I let the silence do the work. Silence always frightened liars. My son's fist pounded the doorframe. "Put the payments back. Sign the house over. Do it now, or we swear, we'll take this to court. The folder is enough to bury you." I let my eyes drift past them. Down the hall, the motel manager leaned out of his office, pretending to sort mail but watching closely. A couple leaving their room paused, staring. The hallway became a stage, and I realized this wasn't private anymore. My humiliation had an audience. "You really want to do this here?" I asked softly. My son's voice rose anyway, anger boiling past reason. "Yes. Everyone should know what you are, a thief." The word echoed down the corridor. The couple exchanged glances. The manager's brows furrowed. Whispers began, faint but cutting. Public fallout had arrived at my door. I smiled faintly, letting them talk, letting the words hang in the stale motel air. Then, calmly, I reached to the desk and lifted the envelope, the copies of the black folder. Through the narrow gap in the door, I held up one page, pressing it to the chain so they could see. "Funny thing about evidence," I said. "It doesn't just accuse, it reveals." My son squinted, confusion flickering across his face. "Bank statements," I continued. "Loan applications. This one especially caught my eye." I tapped the paper with my finger. A $50,000 loan attempt. In my name. Using my house as collateral. His wife's mouth opened, then closed. She turned to him sharply. "What is he talking about?" My son stammered, his bravado slipping. "He's twisting it. That's not what it looks like." But it was. I slid the page along the crack of the door, letting her take it. She snatched it up, her hands shaking as her eyes scanned the text. The forged signature at the bottom glared back, undeniable. Her face drained of color. You told me it was just savings. Just money he owed you. You never said you used his house." He grabbed her wrist, trying to pull the paper away. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. Lying? I cut in, voice low but sharp. Then why does the bank confirm this loan attempt? Why does the signature almost match mine, except for the places your hand trembled? He froze. His wife yanked her wrist free, glaring at him with fresh fury. You forged it? You dragged me into this with a lie. The hallway grew quieter, the whispers sharper. The couple down the hall stopped pretending to move. The manager leaned further out of his office. My son wasn't just facing me anymore. He was facing a jury. He slammed his palm against the door. Stop this. You're tearing our family apart. I met his eyes, calm. No. You tore it apart the moment you chose greed over blood. His wife's voice cracked. You told me it was his fault. That he stole from you. All this time, it was you? My son's face twisted in rage. He turned on me, voice breaking into a snarl. You think you've won? You haven't seen desperate yet. That threat, that promise, it didn't sound like bluster. It sounded dangerous. I held the folder copies tighter, feeling the paper dig into my palm. For weeks, that folder had been my cage. Tonight, it became my weapon. Down the hall, the manager stepped forward at last. Everything all right here? I didn't answer. Instead, I shut the door slowly, the chain still in place, leaving my son and his wife in the hallway under the weight of watching eyes. Their whispers, their lies, their threats, they weren't private anymore. The truth was out, and cracks had begun to show. Behind the closed door, I pressed my back against the wood, my chest heaving. Their words replayed in my head, especially his last one. A promise. A warning. And I knew promises from desperate men were the most dangerous of all. He didn't threaten me this time, he promised. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. As their voices faded down the hall, I realized the next move wouldn't be theirs. It would be mine. The motel walls still echoed with their shouting long after they left. I sat at the desk, staring at the copies of the black folder, the inked lies that had nearly strangled me. For weeks, they had held this over my head. Now, it was time I turned their weapon against them. By morning, I was at the courthouse. The building loomed heavy with stone pillars, its steps worn from decades of feet carrying burdens like mine. I climbed slowly, each step deliberate, the folder copies tucked under my arm. Inside, the air was stale with paper and dust. The clerk behind the counter looked up, her glasses sliding down her nose. Can I help you? Yes, I said, voice steady. I want to file a complaint. Fraud. Forgery. Theft attempted in my name. Her eyebrows rose, but she handed me a form. I filled it out carefully, each letter pressed into the paper like a scar. My son's name. The dates. The amounts. My signature, the real one this time. When I slid the papers back across the counter, the clerk studied them, then glanced at me. We'll need evidence. I lifted the envelope and pulled out the copies of the forged loan application, laying them flat on the desk. This is all the evidence you'll need. She frowned, leaning closer. These are convincing. Whoever did this knew your handwriting well. I swallowed hard. He should. He watched me write checks his whole life. Her expression softened, but her tone remained professional. A sheriff will need to follow up. You may want legal counsel. That's when I met him, a lawyer in a navy suit, his tie slightly crooked, walking through the lobby with a stack of files. Our eyes met, and something about the calm way he carried himself made me step forward. Excuse me, I said. Do you handle fraud cases? He paused, studied me for a moment, then nodded. Depends on the details. I handed him one of the folder copies. He read it quickly, then whistled under his breath. That's a felony. Whoever forged this didn't just cross a line, they burned the whole fence. His name was Harris. He asked me to sit with him in a side office. The room smelled of ink and old carpet, the kind of place where secrets turned into strategy. "Here's what you need to know," Harris said, flipping through the pages. "If this is real, and it looks real, your son could face criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft by deception. It won't be pretty." My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm. "I'm not looking for pretty. I'm looking for truth." He nodded. "Then truth is what we'll go after. But be prepared. This won't just break him. It'll expose him. Everyone will know." I let the words sink in. Exposure. Public fallout. That was what he feared most, more than prison, more than debt. His lies thrived in shadow. My revenge would be daylight. Harris gathered the copies into a neat pile, his pen tapping against the desk. "I'll draft the complaint. We'll get the sheriff involved. But I'll need the originals if you can get them." "They're still in the house," I admitted. "Then we'll subpoena them," Harris said. "Let your son hand over the very rope he tried to hang you with." The image made my chest ache, but also gave me a grim satisfaction. When I left the courthouse, the sun hit my face sharp and unyielding. Across the street, people bustled through their day, shopping, talking, laughing. They had no idea a war had just been declared. I stopped at the diner for coffee. The pastor sat in a corner booth, nodding politely as I passed. He'd heard rumors already, I could see it in his eyes. But for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of gossip. I felt the weight of proof in my hands. By the afternoon, Harris called. His voice was clipped but steady. "It's done. Complaint filed. Sheriff will serve notice tomorrow." I hung up the phone slowly, letting the words settle into the motel's silence. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, my son's door would be knocked on by someone he couldn't intimidate. That evening, I sat on the bed, the folder copies resting on my lap. I traced the forged lines with my finger, then looked at my real signature beside it. One was a lie, trembling and false. The other was truth, solid, unbroken. For weeks, I had been cornered, humiliated, cast out. Now, for the first time, I was striking back. Not with shouting. Not with fists. With the law. With dignity. He thought the folder would bury me, but tomorrow, it would be the sheriff's knock on his door. As I slid the envelope under my pillow that night, I knew, when the sun rose, the first strike would be theirs to suffer. The sheriff came the next morning. I wasn't there to see the knock, but word traveled fast. By noon, half the town already knew. By evening, I saw the cracks myself. I had gone to the grocery store, just to buy bread, milk, and coffee. A simple errand. But in this town, nothing stays simple when shame enters the room. The automatic doors slid open, and I felt the shift immediately. Conversation softened, then silenced. Eyes lingered too long. Whispers swelled like storm clouds overhead. I gripped the cart and kept walking, head high, though my stomach churned. A young clerk pretended to restock soup cans while watching me, his hands fumbling with the labels. At the end of the aisle, I saw her, my daughter-in-law. She stood frozen by the dairy case, a gallon of milk in one hand, her other clenched white around the cart handle. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and for the first time, she couldn't meet mine. A woman beside me muttered under her breath, not softly enough. "That's the thief's family." The words sliced clean through the air. My daughter-in-law heard them. I saw her flinch, saw her eyes dart around as though the store itself had turned against her. She abandoned the milk, leaving it sweating on the floor, and hurried past me, her cart rattling. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to say something, to me, to anyone, but no words came. I didn't stop her. I just watched her leave, her footsteps quick and uneven, as if chased by the whispers behind her. When I reached the register, the cashier, an older man I'd known for years, rang up my items without a word. But when he handed me the receipt, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "They say he forged your name." "They're not wrong," I answered simply. His eyes widened. He nodded once, firm, and I knew then the tide was turning. Truth was trickling out, and lies were washing away. Later that evening, I passed by my son's workplace, a small contractor's office near Main Street. The sign out front flickered, half-burnt, just like the life inside. Through the glass, I saw him at his desk, his shoulders hunched, his head in his hands. A man in a suit stood across from him, creditor, lawyer, maybe both. Papers lay scattered, and my son's voice, muffled but sharp, carried through the glass. The suited man shook his head, gathered the papers, and left. My son remained seated, staring at nothing. The proud man who once shouted me down at my own kitchen table now looked like a child caught in a storm too big to outrun. I didn't go inside. Watching was enough. By the time I returned to the motel, dusk had fallen. I spread the copies of the black folder across the bed again, not because I needed to study them, but because I needed to remember. This was what had nearly destroyed me. And this was what now destroyed him. I thought of my daughter-in-law's face, drained of color in that grocery aisle. Of the whispers that followed her like shadows. Of my son hunched over in that office, stripped of certainty. For weeks, they had held the folder like a crown, believing it gave them power. Now, every page of it was a chain tightening around their necks. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Outside, the neon sign of the motel flickered, buzzing against the night. The phone rang once more. I answered. It was my son, his voice a hollow echo of what it used to be. "Dad, everything's falling apart. They're saying I forged your name. They're threatening to take the house. Please, please, just tell them it isn't true." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. The same man who once called me a thief was now begging me to lie for him. Why should I? I asked quietly. Silence. Then a sob, muffled and raw. The line went dead. I set the receiver down gently, my chest heavy but firm. His collapse had begun, not because I struck first, but because truth had. I gathered the copies back into the envelope, slid it under the pillow, and lay back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, sleep didn't feel like surrender. Their lies collapsed under the weight of truth, and I didn't lift a finger. But humiliation alone wouldn't end it, the final blow sat waiting in a sealed envelope. The diner was full that Sunday morning, the kind of crowd that only gathers after church. Plates clattered, coffee poured, voices overlapped in a low hum that buzzed through the air. I slid into a corner booth, ordered my usual black coffee, and unfolded the morning paper. But I could feel the weight of every eye in the room. They all knew. The whispers had started before the sheriff's knock. Now they had turned into open talk. My son's name carried across the booths, each mention of forgery and loan a stone thrown into still water. Carol, the waitress, set my cup down gently, her hand resting for a moment on the table. "Rough week?" she asked softly. I gave a faint smile. "You could say that." Her eyes flicked toward the door. "You might want to brace yourself." I followed her gaze. The door creaked open, and my daughter-in-law stepped inside. She clutched her purse tight against her chest, her shoulders hunched, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. The chatter in the diner dipped to silence, then swelled again with sharper edges. "Isn't that his wife?" someone whispered near the counter. "Yeah. Imagine the shame," another replied. "Poor kids, living with parents like that." Each word was a lash. I watched her freeze in the doorway, her eyes darting around, searching for a place to hide. There was none. She spotted me, sitting in the corner booth. For a moment, I thought she'd turn and run. But she didn't. She walked stiffly toward me, each step a battle. When she reached the table, she didn't ask permission. She slid into the opposite seat, her hands trembling as she set her purse down. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They all know." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness steady me. Truth has a way of walking into rooms before we do. Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked hard, forcing them back. "He told me it was just savings. That you'd stolen from him." I believed him. I stood with him. And now, her voice broke. "Now I see what he really did." I didn't speak. Silence was sharper than any word. Across the diner, the pastor rose from his booth. A tall man with kind eyes, he walked over, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. "Sometimes truth defends itself," he said softly, looking between us. The whole diner fell quiet again. Every ear leaned closer. Every gaze burned hotter. My daughter-in-law crumpled under the weight of it. Her hands fumbled with her purse, pulling out a folded paper. She slid it across the table toward me. "I found this," she whispered. I unfolded it carefully. Another loan application. Another forgery. My name again, scribbled falsely, trembling at the edges. The black folder had been their weapon. Now, scraps of its lies were falling into my hands piece by piece, not by theft, but by guilt. I folded the paper neatly, sliding it into my pocket. "Thank you," I said quietly. Her lip trembled. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." The pastor's hand squeezed my shoulder. "Sometimes forgiveness is harder than truth." I looked at her, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had mocked me, accused me, laughed as neighbors whispered. Now, she sat before me, stripped of pride, swallowed by shame. "I don't know what to do," she murmured. "Then start with honesty," I replied. She bowed her head, her hair falling forward to shield her face. The diner remained hushed, every soul waiting, judging, whispering with their eyes. When she finally rose to leave, the gossip surged again, louder this time. Words like fraud, police, and eviction tangled in the air. She walked through it, shoulders bent, carrying every whisper like a stone strapped to her back. I finished my coffee in silence, the folded forgery heavy in my pocket. The black folder's shadow stretched longer now, its lies unraveling into daylight. When I stepped outside, the crisp air hit like glass. She was there, waiting by the curb, her eyes red, her face pale. My son's car wasn't parked nearby. She had come alone. Her voice shook. "He's getting worse. Desperate. I don't know what he'll do." I studied her, measuring the cracks in her resolve. For the first time, I saw not cruelty, but fear. "Desperation," I said quietly, "makes men dangerous." She looked away, shame written in the curve of her shoulders. Then she whispered, "I'll bring you what else I can. Just, don't let him destroy us completely." I nodded once, neither forgiving nor condemning. As she walked away, her figure small against the gray sky, I felt the envelope in my pocket. Another piece of their fortress, crumbling. Truth had become my ally, and guilt had become my messenger. When I stepped outside, she was waiting, her fear sharper than any threat. The next morning, I sat in Harris's office, the copies of the black folder stacked neatly on his desk. The blinds filtered the sunlight into sharp lines, striping the papers like prison bars. Harris leaned back in his chair, flipping through the latest document my daughter-in-law had handed me at the diner. Another forged loan application, another attempt to sell my name to the highest bidder. He shook his head. "Your son didn't just make a mistake. He built a pattern. Fraud this consistent? It's deliberate. Systematic." My jaw tightened. How many? Harris opened a file, pulling out bank confirmations he had requested. 3 loans attempted under your name. 2 credit lines. And a fake insurance claim that never got approved. He's been digging for months. The words struck like blows, each one heavier than the last. My son hadn't stumbled into betrayal. He had planned it. He had studied my signature, my habits, my life, and tried to hollow it out from the inside. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the armrests. And what happens now? Harris's eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. We bury him, with the truth. This isn't just civil anymore. It's criminal. We'll file a full suit, freeze his assets, subpoena the originals, and hand over every forgery to the DA. The folder copies lay between us, silent but powerful. For weeks, they had been my humiliation. Now, they were becoming his noose. Harris slid a thick envelope across the desk. Here's the draft filing. Once we serve this, everything he owns will be under scrutiny. He won't be able to hide. Not from the law. Not from the town. Not even from his wife. I stared at the envelope, its weight heavier than any suitcase I'd ever carried. Inside was more than paper. It was revenge. Justice. Dignity. I picked it up slowly, the paper crackling under my fingers. File it. Harris nodded. By the end of the week, everyone will know the truth. I left the office with the envelope tucked under my arm. Outside, Main Street bustled as though nothing had changed, but everything had. The sun was brighter, sharper. The air smelled of rain though the sky was clear. Change was coming, and it carried my name, not his forgery, but mine. At the diner later that day, heads turned as I entered. Whispers followed, but their tone had shifted. Curiosity now. Anticipation. A few nods even. Respect was returning, slowly, carried on the back of truth. Carol poured me coffee with a faint smile. Word is, the sheriff's been busy. Folks are saying the papers don't lie. I let the steam rise, warming my face. They never did. People just chose the wrong side of them. That night, at the motel, I spread the copies across the bed once more. The black folder's shadow stretched long in my memory, but no longer as a weapon. It was evidence, proof, power. I thought about my daughter-in-law, her trembling hands as she gave me that forged loan application. Guilt had cracked her mask, and through it, she had handed me another key. My son had used the folder to accuse me. His wife had used its scraps to redeem herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the neon buzzed outside, I placed the envelope of filings on the nightstand beside my bed. Tomorrow, the town would see it. Tomorrow, whispers would turn into headlines. Tomorrow, my son's mask would shatter completely. For years, he had lived off my name. Now, that same name would drag him down, signed not in forgery, but in truth. I whispered into the still room, the words tasting like steel. The dignity you tried to steal is the hammer that will end you. For weeks, the folder had been my humiliation, now it was his noose. Tomorrow, the whole town would hear the truth, with my voice. The courthouse smelled of dust and varnish, the kind of air that clung to old secrets. I sat in the back row at first, watching as my son and his wife shuffled into the room. Their faces were pale, their steps slow, as though the floor itself had grown heavy beneath them. The clerk read the charges: fraud, forgery, attempted theft in my name. Each word echoed through the chamber like a bell tolling for the dead. My son kept his head down. His wife's eyes darted everywhere, looking for escape, for mercy, for someone to believe them. Then the judge asked for the evidence. Harris rose, calm and precise, and handed over the filings. The black folder's copies slid across the bench like blades. Every forged loan application. Every false signature. Each page an accusation that could no longer be denied. The judge scanned the papers, her brow tightening. Convincing. Very convincing. I saw it then, the collapse. My son's shoulders slumped. His wife buried her face in her hands. And for the first time, they didn't look like accusers. They looked like beggars. When the recess came, my son turned, his eyes locking on mine. He stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "Dad, please. Don't let this go further. Don't let them take everything. We can fix this. We're family. Family." The same word he had used as a weapon weeks ago, when he threw me out with my suitcase. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. "Family protects. You tried to erase me." He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "It was a mistake," he said desperately. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Just tell them you forgive me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. They'll listen to you." His wife joined in, her voice thin, pleading. "Please. I didn't know what he was doing. I swear. Don't let our children suffer for this. Don't let us lose everything." The courtroom had gone quiet. People watched, whispers on the edge of their tongues. The pastor sat in the back, his hands folded, his eyes steady on me. This was no longer just between us. This was the community's judgment too. I pulled the folder copies from my coat pocket, holding them up so they could see. "You used my name to steal. You forged my signature. You dragged me through the mud, called me a thief, paraded my shame before neighbors. And now you want mercy?" My son's lips trembled. "Yes. Please. You're my father." I lowered the folder slowly. My voice was calm, sharper than any shout. "I was your father. But you chose lies over blood. You chose greed over dignity. And now, you choose begging over truth." His wife sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. He fell silent, staring at the floor. The judge returned, the gavel striking once. The sound was final, heavy, undeniable. Proceedings would continue. The law would move forward. I sat back down, my hands resting on the folder copies. The weight of their pleas still echoed, but they no longer bent me. I had lived bent long enough. They begged for mercy, but mercy is for the innocent, not for those who signed my name in lies. Tomorrow, the verdict would not only strip them, it would set me free. The final day came. The courthouse benches were packed, neighbors, church members, co-workers, people who had once looked at me with suspicion. Today, they had come for the verdict. I sat in the front row, the black folders copies resting in my lap. My hands didn't tremble anymore. The papers that once burned me with shame now felt light, almost harmless. They had served their purpose. The judge's voice was steady, deliberate. Forgery. Fraud. Attempted theft of property. Each charge rang out, and with each one, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. When she declared the findings against my son, the gavel cracked through the room like a thunderclap. My son collapsed into his chair. His wife wept silently beside him, her face buried in her hands. The same woman who once smirked at me over kitchen tables now looked like someone who had lost the ground beneath her feet. The room buzzed. Neighbors leaned in, whispering not about my guilt anymore, but about my son's fall. The same mouths that once spread lies now spread truth. The pastor rose from the back row, his voice carrying over the murmurs. The truth stands today. Justice has been done. Heads nodded. A few even turned toward me, their eyes softer, apologetic. Mrs. Jensen, the one who had muttered about me being thrown out of my own home, met my gaze across the room. She lowered her head, shamefaced. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. When the session ended, I stood, gathering the folder copies. My son stumbled forward, his face blotched red. "Dad, please. Don't let this be the end. Don't walk away from me." His voice cracked on the word, "Dad." I looked at him, at the man who had called me a thief, who had paraded my shame in front of neighbors, who had built lies on my name. "You ended this," I said softly. "The moment you chose lies over truth." He reached for me, but I stepped back. His wife didn't move. She sat frozen, tears streaking down her face, her hands clutching her purse like it was the last piece of dignity she had left. The community spilled out onto the courthouse steps, voices buzzing like bees. The courthouse doors loomed behind us, the sky bright and cloudless. I stepped down slowly, each stair solid beneath my feet. Conversations hushed as I passed. And then, unexpectedly, hands began to clap. Not loud, not raucous, but steady. One by one, neighbors joined in, the banker, the pastor, even the diner waitress, Carol. Applause built, not for vengeance, but for dignity. For survival. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I simply lifted the folder copies high enough for them to see. The black cover gleamed in the sun, no longer a symbol of lies, but of the truth that had carried me through. The applause grew louder. My chest rose with each sound, the shame that once bent me now gone. I walked to the edge of the steps, paused, and looked back once. My son and his wife stood in the shadows of the courthouse doors, small against the light. Their heads bowed, their whispers drowned by the crowd's respect. I turned away. At home that night, my real home, the one I had reclaimed through truth, I sat at the kitchen table. The folder lay before me, its edges worn from too many hands. Slowly, deliberately, I closed it. The sound of the cover snapping shut was softer than a gavel but heavier than any sentence. I slid it into the drawer, where it would remain. Not as a weapon anymore. Not as a scar. But as a reminder. My wife's photograph leaned against the wall, her smile steady, timeless. I raised my old chipped coffee mug, the one I had carried even when I left with nothing, and whispered to her memory. They tried to erase me. But dignity endures. I closed the folder that night, not as a weapon, but as a reminder, dignity cannot be forged. And as the town's whispers turned to respect, I finally drank my coffee in peace.